Section 3 of Thoughts on Art and Life. Nature. Nature appears to have been the cruel stepmother rather than the mother of many animals, and in some cases not the stepmother, but the pitying mother. Why did nature not ordain that one animal should not live by the death of the other? Nature, being inconstant and taking pleasure in continually creating and making lives and forms, because she knows that her earthly materials are thereby augmented, is more willing and swift to create than time is to destroy, and so she has ordained that many animals shall feed on each other. And, as even thus her desire is not satisfied, she frequently sends forth certain poisonous and pestilential vapors upon the increasing multitude and congregation of animals, and especially upon men who increase to a great extent, because other animals do not feed on them, and since there is no cause, there would follow no effect. This earth, therefore, seeks to lose its animal life, desiring only continual reproduction, and as, by the logical demonstration you adduce, effects often resemble their causes. Animals are the image of the life of the world. Life's philosophy. Now you see that the hope and the desire of returning to one's former state is like the desire of the moth for the light, and the man who, with constant yearning and joyful expectancy, awaits the new spring and the new summer, and every new month and the new year, and thinks that what he longs for is ever too late in coming, and does not perceive that he is longing for his own destruction. But this desire is the quintessence, the spirit of the elements, which, finding itself captive in the soul of the human body, desires always to return to its giver. And I would have you know that this same desire is the quintessence which is inseparable from nature, and that man is the model of the world. And such is the supreme folly of man that he labors so as to labor no more, and life flies from him while he forever hopes to enjoy the goods which he has acquired at the price of great labor. The senses and the soul. The soul seems to dwell in the intellect, and the intellect appears to dwell in that part where all the senses meet, which is called the brain, and the brain does not pervade the whole body, as many have thought. On the contrary, it dwells entirely in one part, because if it were all in all and the same in every part, it would not have been necessary for the instruments of those senses to combine among themselves in one single spot, but rather it would have been sufficient for the eye to fulfill the function of its sensation on the surface without transmitting, by means of the optic nerves, the likeness of its vision to the brain, so that the soul, for the reason given above, might perceive it in the surface of the eye. Likewise, with regard to the sense of hearing, it would have been sufficient if the voice had sounded only in the porous cavity of the indurated bone which lies within the ear, without making any further transit from this bone to the brain, which is its destination and where it discourses with common judgment. The sense of smell, too, is likewise compelled by necessity to proceed to the intellect. The sense of touch passes through the nerves and is conveyed to the brain, and these nerves diverge with infinite ramification in the skin, which encloses the limbs of the body and the entrails. The nerves convey volition and sensation to the muscles, and these nerves and the tendons which lie between the muscles and the sinews give movement to them. The muscles and sinews obey, and this obedience takes effect by the decrease of their thickness, for in swelling their length is reduced, and the tendons which are interwoven among the particles of the limbs shrink, and as they extend to the tips of the fingers, they transmit to the brain the cause of the sense of touch which they feel. The tendons, with their muscles, obey the nerves as soldiers obey their officers, and the nerves obey the brain as the officers obey their captain. Thus the joint of the bones obeys the tendon, and the tendons obey the muscles, and the muscles obey the nerves, and the nerves obey the brain, and the brain is the dwelling of the soul, and the memory is its ammunition, and the perception is its refundary. Of sensation. The brain is that which perceives what is transmitted to it by the other senses. The brain moves by means of that which is transmitted to it by the five senses. Motion is granted to the senses by objects, and these objects, transmitting their images to the five senses, are transferred by them to the perception, and by the perception to the brain, and there they are comprehended and committed to the memory, in which, according to their intensity, they are more or less firmly retained. The thinkers of ancient times concluded that the part of man which constitutes his intellect is caused by an instrument to which the other five senses refer everything by means of the perception, and this instrument they have named the common sense or brain, and they say that this sense is situated in the center of the head. And they have given it this name common sense solely because it is the common judge of the other five senses, that is to say, sight, hearing, touch, taste, and smell. The common sense is stirred by means of the perception which is placed between it and the senses. The perception is stirred by means of the images of things conveyed to it by the external instruments to the senses, and these are placed in the center between the external things and the perception, and the senses likewise are stirred by objects. Surrounding objects transmit their images to the senses, and the senses transfer them to the perception, and the perception transfers them to the common sense, brain, and by it are stamped upon the memory, and are there retained in a greater or lesser degree according to the importance and intensity of the impression. The sense, which is most closely connected with the perception, is the most rapid in action, and this sense is the eye, the highest and chief of the others. Of this sense alone we will treat, and we will leave the others in order not to unduly lengthen our matter. Automatic movements. Nature has ordained for man the ministering muscles which exercise the sinews, and by means of which the limbs can be moved according to the will and desire of the brain, like to officers distributed by a ruler over many provinces and towns, who represent their ruler in these places and obey his will. And this officer, who will in a single instance have most faithfully obeyed the orders he received from his master by word of mouth, will afterwards, in a similar way, of his own accord fulfill the wishes of his master. An example of this can be frequently seen in the fingers which learn to perform on an instrument the things which the intellect commands, and the lesson once learnt, they will perform it without the aid of the intellect. And do not the muscles, which cause the legs to move, perform their duty without man being conscious of it? You will see palsied and shivering persons move, and their trembling limbs, such as their head and hands, quiver, without the permission of the soul, and the soul, though it expend all its might, cannot prevent these limbs from trembling. The same thing occurs in epilepsy, or when limbs are partially truncated, as in the case of tails of lizards. Intellect. It happens that our intellect is that which prompts the hand to create the features of figures and divine aspects until it finds satisfaction. And since the intellect is one of the tones of our soul, by means of the soul it composes the form of the body where it dwells, according to its volition. And when it has to reproduce a human body, it takes pleasure in repeating the body which it originally created, whence it follows that they who fall in love are prone to become enamored of what resembles them. Of the senses. There are four powers: memory, intellect, sensuality, and lust. The first two are intellectual, the others sensual. Of the five senses, sight, hearing, smell are with difficulty prevented. Touch and taste not at all. Taste follows smell in the case of dogs and other greedy animals. Why does the eye perceive things more clearly in dreams than with the imagination when one is awake? Time. Although time is included among continuous quantities, Being indivisible and immaterial, it does not altogether fall into the scope of geometry, by which it is divided into figures and bodies of infinite variety, which are seen to be continuous insomuch as they are visible and material. But it agrees only with its first principles, i.e., with the point and the line. The point in time may be compared to an instant, and the line to a length of a certain quantity of time. Just as the point is the beginning and end of a line, so is an instant the beginning and end of any given space of time, and just as a line is infinitely divisible, so can a given space of time be likewise divided, and as the divisions of the line are in proportion to each other, so likewise are the divisions of time. In 12 whole figures the cosmography of the miniature world will be shown to you in the same manner as Ptolemy in his cosmography. And so I will divide it afterwards into limbs as he divided the world into provinces. Then I will explain the function of the parts in every direction, and put before your eyes a description of the whole figure and substance of man as regards his movements by means of his limbs. And thus, if it please our great author, I will demonstrate the nature of man and his habits in the way I describe his form. On the human body. And thou, O man, who wilt gaze in this work of mine on the marvellous works of nature, if thou thinkest it would be an act of wickedness to destroy it, think how much more wicked it is to take the life of a man. And if this his structure appears to thee a miraculous work of art, remember that it is nothing in comparison with the soul which inhabits this structure. For verily, whatever it may be, it is divine. Let it, then, dwell in his work and at his good will, and let not thy rage nor malice destroy so great a thing as life, for he who does not value it does not deserve it. The experimental method. By these rules thou wilt be able to distinguish falsehood from truth, by means of which knowledge men aim at possible things with greater moderation. And do not veil thyself in ignorance, for the result of this would be that thou wouldst be ineffectual and fall into melancholy and despair. Of navigation below the waters. How, by the aid of a machine, many may remain for some time under water. And how and why I do not describe my method of remaining under water and of living long without food. And I do not publish nor divulge these things by reason of the evil nature of man, who would use them for assassinations at the bottom of the sea, and to destroy and sink ships, together with the men on board of them. And, notwithstanding, I will teach other things which are not dangerous. Of physiognomy. I will not dwell on false physiognomy and chiromancy, because there is no truth in them, and this is manifest because chimeras of this kind have no scientific foundation. It is true that the lineaments of the face partly reveal the character of men, their vices and temperaments, but in the face, A, the features which separate the cheeks from the lips, and the nostrils and cavities of the eyes, are strongly marked if they belong to cheerful and good-humoured men, and if these are slightly marked, it denotes that the men to whom they belong are given to meditation. B. Those whose features stand out in great relief and depth are brutal and bad-tempered, and reason little. C. Those who have strongly marked lines between the eyebrows are bad-tempered. D. Those who have strongly marked lines on the forehead are men full of concealed or unconcealed bewailing. And we can reason thus about many features. But the hand? You will find that whole armies perished in the same hour by the sword, in which no two men had similar marks in their hands, and the same argument applies to a shipwreck. of pain. Nature has placed in the front part of man, as he moves, all those parts which, when struck, cause him to feel pain. And this is felt in the joints of the legs, the forehead, and the nose, and has been so devised for the preservation of man, because if such pain were not felt in these limbs, they would be destroyed by the many blows they receive. Why plants do not feel pain. While nature has ordained that animals should feel pain in order that the instruments which might be liable to be maimed or marred by motion may be preserved, plants do not come into collision with the objects which are before them, whence pain is not a necessity for them, and therefore when they are broken they do not feel pain as animals do. Lust is the cause of generation. Appetite is the support of life. Fear or timidity is the prolongation of life. Pain is the preserver of the instrument of the human frame. Fear. Just as courage is the danger of life, so fear is its safeguard. Body and soul. Let him who wishes to see how the soul inhabits its body observe what use the body makes of its daily habitation. That is to say, if the soul is full of confusion and disorder, the body will be kept in disorder and confusion by the soul. The soul can never be corrupted with the corruption of the body, but it is like the wind which causes the sound of the organ, and which ceases to produce a good effect when a pipe is spoilt.